Welcome to Grandma Has ADHD, the podcast exploring the surprising, challenging, and often overlooked world of ADHD in seniors. I'm your host, Jamie Shapiro, the founder of Silver Linings Transitions and an ADHD specialist. Professionally, as a senior move manager for more than 10 years, I've worked intimately with seniors challenged with decluttering and downsizing. Personally, I am the child of 2 ADHD parents, and I have ADHD. ADHD isn't something that goes away with age. Grandma Has ADHD is here to educate and entertain seniors and those who love them with stories of hope, resilience, and strategies, because it's never too late to understand yourself better and find your tribe. Let's get started with today's episode. Welcome to Grandma Has ADHD. I am here with a very special guest and personal friend, Dr. Joel Lazar. And Joel is laughing because this is our second round of introductions because I forgot to hit the start record button. As I share, I have ADHD, like to interview guests with ADHD. When I get to be real, then you get to be real. So Dr. Joel Lazar is a licensed psychologist who was not diagnosed with ADHD as a child, but realized he had ADHD as an adult. And he's going to talk about his own experience. He has a BS from Syracuse University and his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Maine at Orono. Orono? You told me in the last Orono. And I am so excited to have you here with me today. Joel, Dr. Joel Lazar, Dr. Lazar, Your Majesty. How should I address you?
Well, when I first got my license, it was important to be Dr. Lazar because you have to jump through a lot of hoops. Okay. Afterwards, I kind of said, okay, you know what? Put your ego in check here. And so now when people say, what is your preference? I say, my preference is to be asked my preference. So whatever's comfortable for you.
That.
Whatever's comfortable for you.
Nice answer. Well, and I don't want to diminish, first of all, the fact that you got a PhD, but that you got a PhD with ADHD is also an accomplishment, which means that obviously it was your zone of interest, because what I have learned is if there is something we love and it interests us, then it is no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well,
right?
it's less of a problem. Let's put it this way, because just to kind of walk through it real quick, the process of getting a PhD, the classes weren't bad because I was interested. And I don't know if we'll address this, but ADHD people tend to do much better if we're interested than if something's boring.
Right.
That's when procrastination is a very tempting thing. Right?
Yes.
But the problem is that after you do your classes and your clinical training, you have to do a dissertation and there's no external structure. And when there's external structure, like I don't miss deadlines hardly at all, but if I don't have a deadline, I can take nearly forever for something.
Interesting.
And so the dissertation took longer than probably for a number of people, but you're right. The fact that it actually got completed, and I'll boast, I got my dissertation done with honors.
Wow.
Is a minor miracle. Either that or proof that there is divine intervention. One of those two.
Well, I don't host a show on that. And of course, I love that subject and we could chase the squirrel, but I'm going to bring us back in. Do you use the term squirrel, by the way?
No.
Do you know about it?
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh. So you are today years old when you learn the ADHD term squirrel. So it's a very common term. You can look it up. When somebody with ADHD goes off tangent, then you say squirrel and it's like a big joke. So everybody yes, I just saw, if you're watching on the show, you'll see Joel's mouth goes open and wide. Yes, Joel, you can check the Urban Dictionary and you will notice that is definitely a term that we use in the ADHD space. So squirrel. Yeah. And
that's
so
cool. I'm familiar with monkey brain, but I didn't want squirrel.
Yeah. But now you have a word you can use when you go off tangent squirrel. Okay. So So I'm glad you learned something from me today. Tell me about your ADHD discovery and how you learned you had it.
Okay. So when I was a kid, it's clear to me now that I had all the symptoms of ADHD and probably a moderate to severe case. Like ADHD, like almost everything, comes in different severities. You could have a severe, moderate, mild, and some people even have some of the symptoms that aren't diagnosable. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, I was really fidgety. I had a hard time staying in my seat. The example, I got hit by a car one time because of impulsiveness.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, but my impulsiveness mostly verbal, and that's carried on to today. But like, for instance, I'd be in class, and unfortunately I was very good at math. So I'm in third, fourth grade, and the teacher will say, okay, so class, how much is 3 plus 4? And I'd yell out 7. Raise your hand. You have to raise your hand. I said, I'm sorry. Because I never did that on purpose. It was impulsive.
Right. I understand.
So she'd say, how much is 11 plus 4? And I'd say 15. So I got a call on.
I could just picture you as that little annoying boy that everybody is like, oh my gosh, does he ever shut up?
Yeah. And so, but I was, to be honest with you, I think as a result of the ADHD, I became shy because the problem was that when you have ADHD as a kid, you're a pain in the butt to the adults in your life, your teachers, your parents. And to be honest with you, I was just trying to fly under radar so I would stop getting negative feedback.
Right. So do you think that's why a lot of times social anxiety is the biggest comorbidity with ADHD because of that?
I wouldn't be surprised. And actually, from my understanding, there's a number of things that can be comorbid. Like, for instance, on and off, I've had tics, motor movements. I don't do verbal stuff. But I think, if you realize that you've done stuff and gotten a lot of negative feedback for it, it's real easy to, I guess, hold back socially because you don't want to say something wrong or you don't want to upset somebody. So I think your point is probably, unfortunately, really accurate.
Right. And I know that it is. Although, and I always like to tell people I'm not a doctor, but I joke, and I probably said it in other episodes, but you know how when somebody has ADHD, they tend to hyperfixate on something that really interests them, and they'll learn everything that they can. And a lot of times it's that little boy with the dinosaur, and he can recite every dinosaur and when it lived and what it did. That's become my ADHD. ADHD has been my hyperfixation. I had to do a lot of training to get my level 2 certificate for the Institute of Chronic Disorganization. So we had to read several books, and then we had to take a couple courses and take a test. And I read way more than was, but and even I'm done with it, and I'm going to be working towards coaching. And I still, every day, I'm just listening to podcasts, other people's, and, reading books. And it's just, so anyway, I'm glad that I could educate you, not just about the squirrel. But so you learned you had ADHD.
Graduate school. When in graduate school, I'm starting to learn about ADHD. All of a sudden, it made sense. This is why I was so fidgety. This is why I couldn't complete tasks. This is why I got distracted so easy. I mean, God forbid you sit an ADHD kid next to a window and it's like sabotaging their whole rear, And so, but what was kind of cool about it is that when it started to make sense, to be honest with you, it was a relief.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden I realized, okay, you know what? Because back then, I'm 66. Yeah. And so back then, if you weren't paying attention, if you were distractible, they thought you were either like disorganized, or they thought that you were unmotivated, you were lazy. You were oppositional, and none of that was the case. But yet you feel bad about yourself. And the term I kind of thought about for myself later on is I felt like my body betrayed me.
Okay.
It wouldn't cooperate.
Right. Yeah, I get that. Felt that way actually when I had cancer. When I was like, here, I was healthy. I had, I never smoked a cigarette in my life. I didn't do drugs. I exercised and, did everything I was supposed to do, all the right things. And then I still got cancer. And I did feel like a betrayal. I think a lot of us, and, I'm going off the tangent, but that's what we do. When we find out we have ADHD, there's this, I remember actually blaming my grandmother, tangent, but so my grandmother had really bad varicose veins, and really bad. And I had really bad varicose veins, starting with issues with my veins in high school. And I used to say to my grandma, this is your fault. This is your fault. I have these veins because you have them. And I feel like as a parent who has ADHD, there is a little bit of, I gave this to my kids, but it's not like we didn't do anything to get it. It is just, it was the cards that we were dealt, right? Do you have a child or grandchild with ADHD, Joel?
Yeah. So my son is 29 and he's got ADHD. And I teasingly tell people I was generous enough to share the gene with them. I don't think he said thank you yet, by the way. Maybe I'll bring that up, But here's the thing is that he's so smart. He got his undergraduate degree from Berkeley, and that was medical school. And basically until he got into, it's a DO school, a doctor of osteopathy. And what happens until he got there and the bar was so high, he still excelled. But all of a sudden in medical school, it's like, I'm having a hard time reading all the stuff that they want me to read. And for the first time in his life, he went back, got evaluated officially and started medication. And today he's a doctor of osteopathy.
Right. Have you heard of the term twice exceptional? Are you familiar with that?
No.
So actually, my oldest child is twice exceptional. It's very common for gifted children to also have ADHD. And so because they are so smart, they can compensate for it. And actually, this was the psychiatrist who evaluated Will when Will was a junior in high school had said to me that, oh my gosh, see, you're about to witness one of my brain moments where I lose a word or I lose a thought, which is very interesting. But, oh, okay, I remember now. He said that there were other people in med school with him that were being diagnosed because suddenly your brain isn't able to compensate. And that's where he said a lot of times it will catch up with people because it's very common. That's why this is a term twice exceptional. So there's a misconception because a lot of people with ADHD are lazy or they're, but it's really not that at all. We can be incredibly bright, but we have to. But boredom, as Dr. Ned Hallowell, he's probably one of the people I quote the most. He says that boredom is a kryptonite for someone with ADHD. We don't do boredom well. Mm-hmm. And I was also going to share with you that Dr. Ned Hallowell, who is I know he's like a leading expert in ADHD. All 3 of his children have ADHD and are all incredibly successful. So
can I share something about boredom for a second?
Please.
So basically, it's kind of weird that the primary medications for ADHD are stimulants. Because if you think about it, if I can't sit still and if I can't pay attention, if you give me a stimulant, should I be spinning out of control? I mean, what's going on?
Right.
So here's the theory now. So our brain is an electrical system, even though it runs by chemicals. And there's a certain amount of electrical energy that puts us into our comfort zone. Okay. So when we're bored, we're understimulated. Okay. The theory now is people with ADHD, we're constantly understimulated. Okay. And what happens here is when you give a person stimulants, now all of a sudden our brain is comfortable and we don't need those compensatory behaviors.
Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. I'm glad you shared that with me.
Mm-hmm.
So you told me when you found out that you had ADHD that it was sort of like a relief, like, oh, this all makes sense now. So you're a therapist or a psychologist, sorry. When you're seeing a patient and are they coming to you and saying, I think I have ADHD, or are you seeing it in a patient?
I would say I kind of bring it up more than my patients do. Right?
Okay.
And what happens is people will be telling me how they have this problem with procrastination is often the symptom that's the most obvious. Because that's obviously really frustrating when you find yourself putting something off and putting something off. I teasingly tell people that I went to a talk on procrastination, and I'm sure that everybody there, it was for therapists. And I'm sure everybody there was a procrastinator and trying to figure out how do I stop myself from doing this, And so, of course, I put off the presentation for so many times. I thought, okay, you got to go to procrastination talk. Okay? And the woman had a really interesting idea. Real quick, she said, she's not a procrastinator. If you give her a task, she does it right away. So she calls herself task motivated. She said, when procrastinators procrastinate, we sometimes get kind of judged. We're lazy, we're unmotivated. She said, procrastination is a style, not a problem, if you can meet 2 criteria. Do you do quality work? And do you meet your deadline? If you do both of those things, then it's a style. It's not a problem. Well, one of the guys then asked a question. He says, but isn't it bad that we have to get anxious kind of before a deadline? So I don't think I said this. So she wants to relabel procrastination deadline motivated people. And he said, yeah, but we have to get anxious before the deadline. Isn't that bad? She goes, oh, you don't get it. I have tasks all the time. So I'm always anxious. At least you guys are only anxious at the end. It was a funny way to look.
I wrote that deadline motivated people. I like that expression. Thank you.
In contrast to task motivated.
So let me ask you this question. When you do tell a patient, hey, I think this is what's going on, what is their reaction?
So typically? I usually raise it a little differently. I'll tell a client, has anybody ever brought up the possibility of ADHD? Okay. And most of the time the answer is no. And they'll often ask me, why do you say? And I'll start asking questions. Well, do you find yourself procrastinating a lot? Yeah. Do you find yourself misplacing things? And it's like, oh my God, all the time. Do you find yourself having a hard time completing tasks? How did you know that? And so basically at that point, I have a questionnaire, that's specifically for adults to assess, some of the symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsiveness and distractibility, inattention. And so I'll give them the questionnaire. And more times than not, the person scores in the range where basically, yeah, it looks like you're diagnosable. And most of the time, it's a relief for them too, because they can't figure out why they can't stop procrastinating. Why can't I focus? What's the matter with me? Well, now I know my brain functioning is different.
Well, and it's also nice for them because they are working with you already. And so you're going to help them work through the regret that might come, right? I mean,
well, the reason why I'm laughing is because I tell people that because sometimes when I'm working with parents, they get nervous. Well, what's my kid's future going to look like if they have ADHD? And I tell them teasingly, well, you can use me as your role model. You can have ADHD and a PhD.
I love it. That's great. So, Joel, we're going to pause because I am going to bring in some words from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back. And the next question that I'm going to ask you, just so that everybody will stick around, is how does ADHD show up in your life now? And then what's your favorite ADHD trait? So hang on one second, and I'm going to hit pause, and then we'll come back. If you are listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you or a loved one is feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of ADHD or disorganization. Since those of us with ADHD tend to struggle with where to begin big projects like moving or home organizing, the Silver Linings Transitions team can guide you through the process, breaking tasks down into manageable steps or handling every detail. There's a reason our team carries magic wands when we work with our clients. We can pack and move your entire home, and you won't have to miss a day of work or touch a single box. We also provide home organizing and storage short-outs with an understanding of ADHD. If you have a home to sell, we can provide you free or discounted services when we refer you to one of our realtor partners through our realtor referral program. Visit our website at www.silverliningstransitions.com or call us at 760-522-1624 to learn more about how we can help you make your move or home organizational project magical. And we are back with Dr. Joel Lazar, or his new nickname is Majesty. Do you like it? Is it going to stick?
I could work with that.
Okay, so we left our listeners with, how does ADHD show up in your life?
Yeah. So basically, I had the full package when I was a kid. And for a while there was actually a diagnostic term, attention deficit disorder, ADD, without the H. Okay. Mm-hmm. And psychiatrists have too much time on their hands, and they're at the top of the hierarchy. So they decide to eliminate just ADD. Okay. But right now, basically, I don't really have hardly any of the hyperactivity stuff. I mean, I fidget a little bit in my seat. And my biggest impulsiveness thing right now is interrupting people. And so that's why I kind of have to watch out for that. Okay. But the inattentive part and stuff like that definitely still comes into play. I get distracted really easily. It's one of the things I do is when I'm doing therapy, I take notes during the session. And basically, there's a reason why, because I found almost all people with ADHD remember things better visually than auditorily.
Interesting.
If I see something, I'm much more likely. And plus, when I'm taking notes, basically, even just the kinesthetic movement of my hand muscles keeps me more engaged, and I don't just get distracted talking to clients as much. So I
remember in college, the same thing. If I would have to write it from the textbook so that I could retain. I guess that's why we take notes. And there's all sorts of thoughts on color coding notes and all of that. But for most seniors, they're not enrolled in college, although they certainly keep challenging your brain, right? So that's how it shows up.
But also, like when let's say if I'm in a new group or a new meeting, I will write down on a piece of paper people's name and one physical characteristic of them. Long black hair, green eyes. And so I will remember it because I'm terrible with names also. The big thing now is I'll misplace stuff. I'll misplace my wallet and my keys regularly, even though I have a little bit of a hack to try to stop that. I regularly have to return from my car in the morning because I forgot my keys or I forgot my glasses or stuff like that. So forgetfulness is the big one.
Okay, so what's your hack then?
So I have a basket that's right by the door that I enter my house in. And I try as soon as I walk into the house to put my keys and my wallet into that basket, because otherwise, who knows where it's going to be.
Right. Yeah.
I found myself. So I have a physical planner rather than a stuff on my phone or a computer thing, because the physical planner is more obvious to me. So I'll look at it more. I won't look at my computer or my phone is not as much. And I write down to-do lists every single day. When I do something, whether it's a client meeting or whether it's a to-do item, exit off when I get it done.
Don't we love to cross things off? Like that is such a...
I don't know. You probably know more about this than I do, to be honest with you. Is there much of an obsessive compulsive sort of comorbidity with ADHD?
Oh, yes. It actually is one of the things that it can be comorbid. And I did discover that OCD and ADHD can run in families. You don't have to have both. I actually have both. I have one child with OCD and one child with ADHD, interestingly, but they do tend to run together. Another fact that I've learned, speaking of getting the things in the basket, do you know the 2 times for an ADHD person? What the 2 times are?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Not even a joke. It's now and not now. And so I have done a lot of things for future Jamie. I really think of giving gifts to future Jamie. So what can I do to set Jamie up for success? And that has really helped me to stop like losing things, because I'm like, okay, where am I going to look for it? Where am I going to find it? And creating systems is definitely, or hacks, as I like to call them. So let me ask you this. We've talked about some of the negative. What is your favorite ADHD trait?
Okay. So I found that people with ADHD are often very creative because we don't have linear thinking. Our thoughts are all over the board. And for me, what that's facilitated is the ability to make people laugh. Because I can think of associations. Now, admittedly, a fair number of those moments are dad humor. But that being said, I found that I'm very creative in how I kind of observe stuff. And so I'll make plays on words and kind of be able to kind of make people laugh. And humor is an underrated experience. It's amazing for our brain. It's great for our social relationships. It's great for our mood. And so that's the biggest thing, is I can be really creative with my sense of humor.
Right. I also think, because I was a little bit of a class clown myself, also it was sort of deflecting, because I felt like I wasn't as smart as other people, although now I realize I probably was, but I couldn't put my attention in places that I wasn't interested. Sure. And so I've heard a lot of people do a lot better in college when they're able to take the classes that interest them. But I definitely feel like I was a class clown. And maybe to your point, some of it was that the words come, some words I can't get at all. And some are just like the associations that I'm able to make, or the connections with other people, and also thriving in crisis. I know that like if something we're in a crazy situation, I go into like, I can take charge of this situation. Yeah,
but that's because you're activated. It's the opposite of boredom. And so you're stepping up because your brain is kind of like, oh my God, it's so intense.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are your suggestions for improving your clients and also seniors? Because we are really gearing this. Of course, anybody can listen. They don't have to be a senior. Anybody can benefit, because there just isn't a lot of content out there yet for seniors with ADHD. What is the advice that you can give to them as they are basically reflecting on their lives and suddenly ding, 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 this all makes sense?
So the first thing is to really guard against self-criticism. It's so easy to get frustrated with ourselves. And sadly enough, we're so much less compassionate as a rule to ourselves than we are to others. Like if somebody said, man, I'm having such a hard time paying attention, I'm having such a hard time completing tasks, we wouldn't be very judgmental. Oh, you lazy slob, what's the matter with you? And yet we'll say even worse stuff to ourselves, you know? So the first part is to try to practice self-compassion and ask yourself, what would I tell another person who was going through what I'm going through, so that this way I don't get self-critical? But the key is creating rituals and structure and organization. So basically, again, to kind of maybe have like a daily schedule. Sure. I sometimes, just to kind of transfer this over, I sometimes talk about that with parents. Have a little schedule that's sitting on the bathroom counter. Did I brush my teeth? Did I put away my towel? Did I flush the toilet? And so basically for seniors, it's kind of like, okay, you know what? Did I take my pills? That's true for a lot of seniors. You know,
it's true for me, and I'm not a senior. I have to. Yeah.
But organization, making lists, and also what I tell people, regardless of the age of the person, the more specific you are to when you assign a task to yourself, the more likely you are to complete it. So if you say, I want to work out 3 times this week, you're less likely to do it than if you tell yourself, I want to work out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after lunch. So specificity is really important.
Right.
And
Smart goals.
Yeah. And then the other thing is check off the boxes that you complete, like we were talking about earlier, because sometimes we focus on the things that we didn't do, even if we've accomplished a lot.
Do you ever write something down that you did just so that you can scribble it out?
So it's funny that you say that. I'll do that on the weekend. Like basically, I'll figure out what are the things I want to do on the weekend. I have a whole list. And so, for instance, I'm part of like this meditation group. And so I'll write meditation just so I can kind of make the little line across it. Okay, do that.
Okay.
I do it every single week, but it's still.
Yeah. See, we're kindred spirits.
There you go.
Anything that you want to share that I didn't ask? This is like free flow, Joel. We didn't cover it. I wish I had said it. Because with ADHD, a lot of times we're like, ugh. And then we get out of a situation and we're like, oh, I should have said this. I should have said this. Right.
Right. So two things. One of them is that in terms of seniors is that, unfortunately, if you think about some of this primary symptoms of ADHD, forgetfulness and disorganization, not completing stuff, sadly enough, doctors really have to become more savvy to screening for ADD because this can unfortunately look like dementia or Alzheimer's disorder. And obviously, that's a gross mistake in diagnosis. And so doctors need to be more savvy. And for a while there, basically, professionals who work with ADHD, they really had an uphill battle convincing the community that it was even occurring in adults. Because often hyperactivity went away with puberty.
That's what they thought.
Yeah. And so, but hyperactivity is the most obvious of the symptoms. So that's the thing. And that's why historically also girls have been underdiagnosed because they're less likely to be hyperactive.
Right. So, we can sit still and daydream.
Yeah. So the bottom line here is that we need to kind of let the community know that this occurs in adults who have never been diagnosed, but probably have been showing symptoms their whole life.
Right.
We need to have the community know that there's help out there. Professional counselors. There's also a whole phenomenon, ADHD coaches, to help people with this sort of stuff. And then also that they need to know that, number one, it's not their fault. They're not doing something volitionally. And for what it's worth, I tell people, it doesn't make logical sense to blame yourself for something you're not voluntarily doing.
That is so true.
And then the last one is that you can still have a very successful life professionally, socially, despite the fact that you have this challenge.
Right. So you mentioned coaching, and I don't know if I shared with you that I'm actually enrolled to become a coach with ADCA, ADHD coach. Oh. But how would you, as a psychologist, work in conjunction with a coach? Do you think it's a one or the other? Do you think it's a both? What's your thought?
So I remembered now the thing that I was supposed to say that I almost didn't say. So I have a website. Okay. It's joellazarphd.org. And I have a bunch of handouts.
You need to spell that for people who are listening and might not check show notes.
Yeah. joellazarphd.org.
Okay.
So Joel Lazar, PhD. And I've got a bunch of handouts. Like I said, I'm a fan of handouts because I'm a visual learner. Okay. And I have on a bunch of topics, but two of them specifically are for ADHD. And one handout is tips for adults to try to compensate. And I break it down into compensating at home, compensating as a parent, and compensating at work. Okay.
I wish I'd had that as a parent. Okay.
And then the other one is specifically for parents. And basically, I at the beginning of it, talk about what some of the primary symptoms are, what are some of the needs of children. And then basically, it's a page and a half of suggestions how you can alter their environment to try to help them be more productive and more on task. But the first part, on the first page, the bottom, I have a whole bunch of suggestions based on positive parenting. Because as we said earlier, this can really mess up a kid's self-esteem. But getting so much negative feedback from teachers and parents and stuff like that. So I tell parents, really go out of your way to catch your kid completing tasks, doing something the first time you ask, paying attention, and really acknowledge it and make them feel good about it because what you're doing is self-esteem preservation.
Absolutely. So back to the original question that I asked, which is how does a psychologist work with a coach?
So I would provide those handouts for the ADHD, the adult stuff, but I'm not really focused on that. I can make some suggestions. Whereas with an ADHD coach, you're much more focused on, okay, let's go with the logistics. Okay, let's make those lists together. What do you need to accomplish? What are the bumps in the road? My part is I'll do some of that stuff, but I'm dealing more with like kind of the frustrations that the person has in life, stuff that causes them anxiety or makes them sad or relationship issues. So I'm not nearly as focused as a coach would be on the specific, how do we compensate for whatever ADHD brings into your life?
Right. That's perfect. One of the things that we didn't get to, but I think I would like to ask you, and we're going to go over our 30 minutes if that's okay, and that is emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitive dysphoria and how that's creeping into relationships. Because what I've discovered is that the millennials and the Gen Zers, they are setting these boundaries up that our generations didn't have. So they don't tolerate anything. They're just not, their tolerance level of what they accept in families, where we would be like, well, this is my parent, this is my grandparent, that's just who they are. This generation is like, I get to choose, and I'm choosing no. Are you seeing that as a therapist, and any advice you have? I know that maybe that's a second conversation that we need to have another day.
Well, but here's what I'm finding. I'm finding that there's so much more significant familial conflicts going on these days than I seem to remember in the past. You know, siblings not talking to each other, people not talking to their parents. And what's really sad, and I think unfortunately what you're saying is probably part of this, is that, so for a while there I was affiliated with they used to call it a senior citizen home. Now it's got a different thing. It's senior
communities, senior centers.
So I'll
senior communities, independent living communities.
Yeah. So I was affiliated with one. And it's sadly enough, almost for some people, especially if these seniors are starting to have like dementia and stuff like that, it's like a warehouse. The family just doesn't visit because it's not a happy moment for them. And I think that's one way to spin what you asked is, I think people just don't have that respect for elders and sense of loyalty to the generations before us that perhaps in the past we were taught to have.
I agree 100%. I definitely.
And it's really sad. You know, I really feel for some of these older people. And again, I'll go sideways for a second. So they've done some research on who gets happier when somebody is generous, the givers or the receivers. And they discovered that givers often feel even happier than the receivers did. However, the receivers often feel happier than the givers realize.
Okay, well, that's good advice. So we definitely have some work to do around emotional dysregulation, rejection sensitivity, but not too much to go into with a short attention span. So maybe would you come back?
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay, wonderful. Well, as I like to part, you can find Dr. Joel Lazar on his website. We will have it in the show notes. And again, is it Dr. or Joel Lazar, PhD?
So Joel Lazar, PhD.org.
.org. Okay, that is how you can find him. And you will treat anybody in California, correct? You're licensed to treat anyone in California, not just in San Diego.
Yes, so through telehealth, which has been amazing in terms of opening up opportunities for people who live rurally, or a lot of these senior citizens who are transportation challenged. So I can meet with people online who are not local to San Diego. And also what I've done is my schedule is often busy, but if my schedule is busy, I've also kind of, for what it's worth, made myself available, and I'll say, hey, can I send you my handouts? And if you have any questions, let me know.
Oh, that's so generous of you. And well, we'll let them find you on your website and not put them, unless you want them in the show notes. We can talk about that.
That'll be fine. Like I said,
thank you.
Yeah, no. If you, again, when you're a therapist, if you look at it the right way, it's a blessing. I get to help people remember the good qualities in themselves they've lost track of, to build realistic self-esteem, self-confidence. I get to help people enjoy their relationships more. I get to help people be more productive. I mean, that's pretty cool stuff.
That really is. And that ties so well into the way that I like to end every show, which is making the rest of your life the best of your life.
Mm-hmm.
The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.